Welcome everyone to the Watchlist, a webinar series for ASX listed companies to pitch to real investors such as yourself, so these companies can be considered for your watchlist. Our job is to showcase companies that are on your watchlist or to give you ideas of companies you might want to put on your watchlist, because we know being on your watchlist is a big deal. Today's a bit different to how we normally run these events. Today we are focusing on one commodity, copper. And today we've also brought in a bona fide expert to provide a keynote address to set the scene on what is really happening in the copper market, the supply-demand thematics, and what to look for when evaluating investment opportunities in the sector. In addition, we've found three cracking copper companies to present today: Terra Metals, ASX code TM1, Cooper Metals, ASX code CPM, Sunshine Metals, ASX code SHN, and Renegade Exploration Limited, ASX code NRX. Remember, this webinar is interactive. We want you to ask questions of the presenters. So while they're presenting, think up some questions and submit them using the Q&A button on your screen. I'd now like to introduce our keynote presenter for today, Lowell Resources Funds Management Chief Investment Officer, John Forwood. John, over to you.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much for the invitation to present today and say make a few background comments on copper. If we could just move through the slides, that's the normal disclaimer. Just in terms of the fund, we're about 20% invested in base metals, and the lion's share of that is copper. So copper is important to us and makes up a substantial portion of the portfolio. Just moving on. Look, just a couple of quick slides on the market, and we're focused on the junior resources market. But this is data from Austex, the whole of the ASX resources market, from the tiniest company through to BHP. Average share prices. You can see that 2023 was a terrible year. But the start or since about February this year, we've seen a reasonable uptick in the average share prices on the ASX. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Just next slide, please. The junior sector versus the majors was really hit hard in 2023. This is a chart of all sectors from the US, the S&P 500, either the big boys versus the Russell 2000, either the smaller caps. And you can see that the move away from the small caps has been across most sectors. So it wasn't personal to the mining or resources sector. Next slide, please. And here's some data focused on the ASX. You can see that the larger caps have done very well over the last 24 months. On the left-hand side, the caps greater than 70 odd million, up 70% in the resources market. But the nano caps down 70% over the last 2 years, sorry. But in the last 3 months, there's been an improvement in the more junior sector, and you can see that the sort of the mid-range there, sort of sub 60 odd million, has improved 13% over the last 3 months. So hopefully we are seeing a bit of a trickle-down effect into the much more junior end of the market. Next slide, please. Just to set the scene here, moving on to copper itself. Here's the very long-term copper price going back 70 odd years. You can see, if you cast your mind back 25 years to around the year 2000, you would have been very confident that the copper price wasn't going over $50 a pound anytime soon. But by the mid-2000s, we saw the copper price go on an absolute tear during the 2000s mining and commodity boom, and it hit $4.50 a pound in 2011. So and that's where we are back to today. So it's a very exciting time to be talking about copper. Next slide, please. This is the copper price over the last 30 odd years, plotted against the ASX Junior Resources Index. And it's interesting to note that back in the 2000s mining boom, the copper price and the junior resources sector moved largely in sync. But that coincidence has completely broken down in the last decade or so. And perhaps some of the reasons for that are back in the 2000s, there was capital available to develop projects. Companies, junior companies could have some level of optimism that they were be able to take their project through to production. Whereas today, partly because some of the majors committed some pretty bad capital investment decisions back in the 2000s, there's not nearly as much development capital available today. So moving your project from pre-development through to production is a lot tougher. I think also we've seen a reduction in the number of copper players on the ASX, with things like Oz Minerals getting taken over, Demetallica, etc. So there's just not the opportunity to invest in copper as much as there might have been back 20 odd years ago. Next slide, please. Just very quickly looking at the price performance over the last 12 months of the big boys. You can see Freeport-McMoRan has done really well over the last 12 months. First Quantum has been very much in the news due to the suspension and looks like long-term hiatus in production from its Cobre Panama mine, which produces up to 4 or 5, was producing up to 4 or 5% of the world's copper, and that has had an impact on copper supplies and copper price, particularly copper concentrate supplies. Next slide. And then turning to Aussie producers, you can see the last 12 months somewhat going sideways, but certainly the last 2 or 3 months we've seen a real positive uptick in those share prices. Next slide, please. And then some of the pre-production companies had generally a tough 2023, but the last couple of months since February have been remarkably good for a number of these pre-development copper companies. Moving on. Now, this slide is probably my favourite one. I think it's really important. Basically, it's showing world global copper consumption going back to 1900. I think this slide actually was something that Robert Friedland put up. But in summary, you can see that global copper consumption doubles roughly every 25 years. And we're sitting around 27 million tonnes at the moment. 2023 take us through to 2050. On that basis, you are well over 50 million tonnes of copper consumption by 2050, which is a really big amount. And everybody wants copper. So the big boys, BHP's had its second bid for Anglo, rebuffed. We heard that overnight. And the real drive for that bid is trying to get its hands on Anglo's 700,000 odd tonnes per annum of copper production. Mark Bristow at Barrick, big gold miner, has come out and said he really likes copper and we're not going to have enough copper. And Rio hasn't ruled out making a play for Anglo either for its copper. So copper is very popular. And there's a number of really good fundamental drivers as to why in the long term copper looks very, very positive. Next slide, please. And one of those drivers is a big driver is electrification, and a growing source of demand for electrification is artificial intelligence and data centers. And this is just a slide showing the US demand for power from things like electric vehicles and data centers. And I think Canaccord came out recently and estimated that up to another 6 million tonnes of copper cumulatively could be required for data centers just through to 2030. So that's a massive amount if you're thinking that current global consumption is 27 million tonnes a year. Next slide, please. The Goldman Sachs also forecasting deficits, and it's just increased its forecast deficit for 2026. So that's they're forecasting a 700,000 tonne per annum deficit by 2026. Yeah, look, and the amount of metal required for producing power has doubled, up by 50% in the last 15 years. So every kilowatt of power has a much greater metal intensity, and the major metal that goes into that is, of course, copper. Next one. Yeah, so here's an estimate. There's been, across the resources sector, there's been underinvestment from oil and gas right through to base metals, and copper is one of the standouts in terms of the underinvestment that has occurred, and that's just built up a big requirement for additional investment to try and meet the forecast supply gap over the next 7 or 8 years. This CRU group chart shows that we need another 150 billion invested in copper mining to try and fill that gap. Next slide, please. So turning to the OPEC of copper, Chile, the country, it produces nearly 20% of the world's copper consumption, 5 million tonnes per annum. Far away, above and away ahead of the next largest producer, which is Peru, at 2.6 million tonnes per annum. But looking sort of a bit more granularly at how Chile's been going in trying to ramp up its production. So 2023 was its lowest production for 15 years. 2024 is forecast by the State Copper Company to increase its copper production somewhat, but it's already had to downgrade that increased forecast, and we're not even halfway through the year. They are forecasting a greater, another step up next year, but it's not easy. I think PricewaterhouseCoopers came out with a report in the last couple of weeks saying that 50% of the world's copper production by 2050 will be in heavily drought affected areas, and you can't mine copper without, or can't process copper without water. So there's a real threat to existing copper production, let alone new copper production. Next slide, please. Just turning to recycling, is that going to fill the gap? If we need another 8 million tonnes a year by 2032, is recycling going to be able to step in there? Well, as the copper price goes up, and it has been going up, you will see increased recycling. You'll also see increased, theft of copper from power lines and railways and things. But at 5 odd million tonnes a year of recycling out of possibly a requirement of up to 50 million tonnes by 2050, you can see recycling sort of flat line through to 2021 for 5 or 6 years. So it does look pretty unlikely that recycling will be able to fill that gap. Next slide, please. So what's happening at the moment? Copper processing fees, TCRCs, as many people might have heard, have turned negative in China. That's probably got a couple of causes. One is the extra smelting capacity that the Chinese have been building, but the other is the lack of supply of copper concentrate. Things like Cobre Panama going offline take a big chunk of concentrate out of the market. So from a concentrate point of view, things are very tight. Next slide, please. One of the anomalies, though, in the current market is that we've seen the copper price jump, but we've also seen copper inventories, visible copper inventories in warehouses jump as well. So you can see that Shanghai Futures Exchange warehouse stocks are at a 4-year high. That's a seasonal high. Generally around this time of year, you do see inventories peak, but it is a bit of a head scratcher why you're seeing higher inventories at the same time as the copper price is going higher. Next slide, please. This represents that just again, you can see the brighter green is the Shanghai Futures Exchange. So China, the inventories are growing and they're exporting more copper. So it does indicate that the Chinese market, which is about 50% of consumption, is comfortably supplied at the moment. Next slide, please. Another indicator of that is the contango. So the copper contango, which is the spot versus 3-month spread, is it's the widest it's been, I think, going back to LME records in 1994. So that also indicates that there's adequate supply at the moment for spot, but gets a little bit tighter as you go forward. Next slide, please. The other thing that's I've noticed is the coincidence of metals bouncing since February. You can see this is tin and zinc and copper, all have almost synchronously jumped since around February. Next slide, please. And similarly with gold. So look, I think one of the reasons for this is we saw a report from Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago saying that some 3 of the big oil traders, including Vitol and Gunvor, are back in the metals market. They left the metals markets some time ago, but they're back in. So I think we're seeing some traders pushing the price up, and there is some speculation in the price at the moment for copper. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that China is takes the lion's share of copper consumption at the moment, and I'm sure everyone's heard about the Chinese property crash. But there's been a transition in terms of copper demand in China moving from the real estate sector through to the energy transition sector, and that's includes EVs, EV chargers, and wind turbines and power lines and all sorts of things. So that demand has really been taken up and is increasing, forecast to increase as a result of the energy transition. Next slide, please. So look, things look very positive for copper, particularly in the long term. Just a cautionary note, what can go wrong? So obviously China, the demand can fall there, the economy can, go into recession, if you like. But it's interesting to see what happened with nickel. Like a few years ago, Elon Musk was begging miners to produce more nickel. We didn't know where his nickel was going to come from building his Teslas. And you go back 10 years, and you were seeing people, this chart calling for a shortage of nickel by 2016. But next slide, please. If you go to today, you can see that the forecast shortage in nickel is not until 2030, and the reasons for that are partly thrifting by the EV makers, but largely because the Chinese have come up with a new processing technology to produce battery grade nickel. And Indonesia's, as a result, moved from a relatively small player in the nickel market to being 50% of the supply. So could that happen in copper? Well, copper is a much bigger market, but there are technologies being worked on, particularly in processing more difficult ores. I know, Rio Tinto working on their Newton sulfide leach technology in the Americas. That could be somewhat of a game changer for supplying additional copper. But the market is much bigger. The copper market is much bigger than nickel, about 10 times the size. And there's a bigger shortfall forecast as well. So that might be part of the answer, but it's certainly not the only answer. Next slide, please. And then just another metal that is interesting, just in terms of many people calling for higher metal prices over a very, very long term, and that was uranium. We saw probably 10 to 15 years of forecast every year, analysts forecasting higher prices, and it didn't happen. Uranium went down and down and down. But eventually, dreams can come true. And, last year we saw the uranium price spike to over $100 a pound. So it can take a long time for metals to, realize the forecast, but it certainly can happen, and it can happen very quickly. Next slide, please. Finally, just a plug for our little fund. We do, this is to give investors some heart that you can make really good returns in the junior resources by investing in companies like the ones that we're about to hear from. So that's it from me. Thank you, David.
Thanks, John. Do have time for a quick question, and it probably flows on a little bit from the slide you've just presented. Where does the fund see the best value in copper equities at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think we are naturally focused on the pre-development companies, and I think from some of my slides I've shown earlier, you have seen some of the the majors and the bigger producers run and have better share price performance than the real juniors. So we expect that there should be and could be a trickle-down effect. And it's the juniors that have hopefully going to catch up and go past the big companies, and certainly that's where you get the leverage. So that's where we that's where our portfolio is focused.
Thanks, John. A great presentation, and clearly set the scene for the presentations to come. Thanks for your time and your insights.
It's a pleasure.
Now I'd like to introduce the first of our company presenters, Thomas Lyons, CEO and MD of Terra Metals. Terra is a diversified critical minerals explorer focused on exploring and developing its high-quality West Australian projects. Thanks, Thomas. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, David, and thanks, John, for all those excellent insights into the copper market. It's a great segue into Terra Metals and our Dante project. So we're a copper-focused exploration company. We're drilling for copper right now. We're drilling an expansive 10,000 meter RC drilling program. As you can probably tell by the high-vis shirt and the background here, I am on site at the moment. So I'm up here at the Dante project. We've got quite a big team on site at the moment. We're drilling right now, and we've got about 2,000 meters of drilling left to go. We've put out about 7,000 meters of that drilling at the lab at the moment. We've just received our first lot of assays back, and that is the first week of drilling those samples from we've been drilling for 2 months, so we've received the assays back from the first week of drilling, and over 90% of the assays are left to come back from that drilling. And we've hit magmatic copper sulfides and precious metal system immediately on the first hole. So we're really excited by what that means, and I'm here to share a little bit more about the scale of the opportunity that we're seeing here on the ground and what everyone's got to look forward to. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're in the West Musgraves. We are drilling for copper. We're about 15 k's from Nebo Babel. And I might just skip to the next slide, please. So I'll talk more about the region in a minute, but here's a snapshot of the company for people who don't know us very well. We've got almost 300 million shares on issue. We've got a market cap of around $15 million. Now, our largest shareholder is the Tribeca Natural Resources Fund. So it's quite rare for a junior company to have an institutional shareholder with such a large portion of the company at this stage. So we're very happy with that. We've got a large amount of our top 20 and top 10 shareholders own a huge portion of the company. We've got almost 10% across our directors and management of the company. So it's tightly held. Everyone in this company is very incentivized to see the projects deliver discoveries and resources. So that's what we're focused on, and that's why we're out here. Next slide, please. So we've got an excellent board. I mentioned Tribeca Natural Resources Fund is our largest shareholder. We have Ben Cleary on the board, who's part of Tribeca. Also Hayden Smith, who's formerly Tribeca. Ian Middlemas is our chairman, who is quite well known for being the chairman of multiple ASX listed companies, formerly an executive with Normandy. And we have an excellent technical team. We have Scott Halley, who's our chief geochemist. He's very well known in the industry for being a really great geochemist and a creative thinker. He's agreed to come and work on this project with us, specifically for Dante project, because he's excited by what he's seeing here. And we've got Wolfgang Mayer, who's a specialist consultant and expert in layered mafic, ultramafic intrusive systems, which is what we're drilling into at the moment. Next slide, please. So here's the Dante project. Next slide. We are located, as I said, in the West Musgrave region. We're about 10, 15 kilometers from Nebo Babel. So Nebo Babel is a 400 million ton magmatic nickel, copper, and platinum group element in sulfide deposit just down the road from us. It's in development at the moment. BHP are building it. It's a $1.7 billion mine build. We've also got the Sakuth magmatic copper deposit just near us. It's also got some palladium, gold, and some nickel in it. It's about 160 million tons. And then we have the Manchego deposit just off to the northeast of west of us. So you can see that we're the blue there, Dante project, we're landlocked by BHP. So not many juniors can say that. It's obvious that it's a highly prospective region. It's the land of giants. We're surrounded by major deposits, and that's exactly what we're drilling for in our project. We've got tens of kilometers of outcropping high-grade mineralization, which has never had systematic exploration conducted. We're drilling it right now, and we're hitting copper immediately. So we're very excited by what we're doing right now. Next slide, please. So this is just some research that was published by the WA School of Mines in collaboration with the Centre for Exploration Targeting and the Geological Survey of West Australia. And what they did was plugged in all of the elements that they believe produce these big nickel and copper sulfide deposits, gold deposits, and they spat out a prospectivity ranking over the entire West Musgrave region. They also mapped the major fault, which is thought to be highly responsible for most of the large deposits here as the plumbing system. And what you can see is that Lachlan-Mundrobilla fault runs directly through the Dante project, through the center, and the Dante project has ranked out of that research as the highest ranked in the West Musgraves for copper and nickel, and also the highest ranked prospectivity for platinum, palladium, and gold. Next slide, please. So this is our focus area right now. The project is much larger than this, but we are focusing on the low-hanging fruit and the things that are sticking out of the ground. Our 4 key prospects at the moment are the Cronus intrusion, which is a large magmatic mineralized copper, gold, palladium in sulfide intrusion. It's had some historical drilling. We've just undertaken some drill holes ourselves. We've completed 15 holes. 5 of those are back. All of those holes hit copper and palladium and gold mineralization essentially all the way through every single hole. So we've proven there immediately, proven concept there that it's a big mineralized system. And now our work is to go, the purpose of that shallow RC drilling is to inform the deeper diamond drilling to get down to the point where we believe the higher grade economic mineralization is likely to be. So we're excited to get that EIS funded drilling happening soon. We've just been awarded $220,000 from the West Australian government to drill those holes, which is excellent. It means they see the opportunity here as well. And it's great to have that validation from the Geological Survey of West Australia, now backed up by our own drilling. We've also got the Creus Reef. So we've got 3 reefs on the project. They outcrop in this area for 23 kilometers. We believe strongly, if you look at all those magnetic lines around those reefs, we believe that there are multiple other reefs under a little bit of cover. So that's some exploration upside for us, but we don't really need exploration upside right now. 23 kilometers is a strike length of outcropping mineralization that most human beings can't even fathom. And until you come out here and walk it or fly over it in a helicopter, it's hard to understand. But we've just drilled 3 kilometers of Creus, and we've just released the first couple of holes from 1 drill fence, and we've hit magmatic copper sulfides, platinum, palladium, with a high-grade vanadium titanium byproduct in a stratiform mineralization immediately. So that is an excellent result for the very beginning. 90% of the assays are left to come, as I said, so we're pretty excited to see the rest of those come through. We've also got 2 other reefs. We've drilled the Hyperion Reef after Creus. So 7 kilometers of that reef has been drilled now, 20 holes. All of the holes from Hyperion are out at the lab at the moment and a pending assay. And we're looking forward to getting those back. We've hit the prospective reef on every single drill fence we've drilled so far over 10 kilometers. And very soon, we're about to take the rig from Cronus today or tomorrow down to the Oceanus Reef and drill our 3rd reef. So yes, there is more. The Oceanus Reef is 5 or 6 kilometers long in itself. And collectively, it is an absolutely huge strike. Next slide, please. So here's Creus. So we've just put the initial results out yesterday for the first 3 holes. As you can see, there are 10 more holes to come back there, covering 3 kilometers of strike. As I said, we've hit the reef on every single drill fence that we've drilled out there. And we've seen evidence for multiple reefs. So not just 1 reef. Often in these systems, you only get 1, but we're seeing multiple. And what's exciting about this is it has a lot of similarities to a few different deposits globally. I mean, if you look at the Nebo-Babel resource to the south of us, the magmatic copper, nickel, PGE deposit that BHP are building right now, the copper grade in sulfide there is about 0.33%. And the precious metals are less than 0.1 gram per ton. We're already seeing higher grades than that in our first couple of holes in this stratiform deposit, which sticks out of the ground. And as I said, the beauty of stratiform deposits is they keep going and going and going. That's why, you know, they tend to produce large tonnages. So, but on top of that, we're seeing more than one reef. So once you duplicate these reefs and you stack them on top of each other, well, you know, that obviously increases the scale of the opportunity significantly. So immediately we're hitting, as I said there, good grade of copper. We're getting precious metals. We're seeing copper up to 0.9, almost 1%, which is pretty excellent for the first reconnaissance drill fence drilled. But as I said, since then, we continue to see that along strike. So we're looking forward to putting the rest of those results out. This assay is outstanding for another 5,000 meters of drilling along the reefs, covering 10 kilometers. Next slide, please. So this again is the Dante Reef. So this is just zooming out now to show the Creus and Hyperion reefs. You can see there the drilling that's been undertaken at Hyperion. As I said, 3 kilometers at Creus plus 7 kilometers at Hyperion. All of those assays left outstanding now. We've hit the prospective reef on all of the drill fences that we've drilled so far. And we expect to receive assays now every couple of weeks for the next couple of months. And the Oceanus Reef is still to come. Next slide, please. So this is Cronus. We're really excited here out at Cronus. We've been able to achieve what we'd really hoped to do with the first couple of holes in the shallow RC drilling. So we're drilling the shallow portions of this out. There's been 5 historical drill holes drilled across this. All of them hit hundreds of meters of disseminated copper sulfides and gold and palladium mineralization. And we've put our first shallow fence across the intrusion and proven that mineralization does extend along strike. So the entire intrusion appears to be mineralized. So what we say about this and what our consulting geochemists say about this intrusion is that it has a massive copper budget. It also has a massive gold budget. So when you get a 7-kilometer long magmatic intrusion that appears the entire thing has had metal enrichment in sulfide, there's an extremely high likelihood that there's an area, a zone, a transition point in the evolution of that intrusion where you're going to get high-grade magmatic sulfide mineralization. And the purpose of our shallow RC drilling here is to collect the evidence and determine the vectors so we know where to put that diamond drill hole to get down to that point. And so we've got the right team on this interpreting the data to take a look at that. And that's what we'll be using our EIS-funded diamond drilling funds for a little bit later this year. So you can see some of the intercepts there, you know, over 130 meters of low-grade copper and, you know, 60, 70 meters of gold. But there might be a couple of meters break. If you put them all together, we're talking mineralized from the top to bottom of hole. So essentially from 0 meters all the way down. So there's no point in this intrusion that we've seen that's not mineralized yet, which is an excellent sign for an extremely fertile system. Next slide, please. So it's not just what's sticking out of the ground and what we're focusing on right now. Dante Project is a pipeline of targets that will continue to yield excellent drill targets over years and years to come. So we're naturally, as a junior company, drilling the things which are sticking out of the ground right now. But you can see from the EM targets there that we have a huge pipeline of targets, and we're going to be progressing these and developing the priority ones of these to drilling in the near future. Next slide, please. So I'll just kind of finish up here, and we can look at the rest of it another time. But you know, we're doing really good things on the ground here. We live in the community. We have the town on the tenement. We've got an airstrip here, and we are working with the community every day. We're employing people, and we're having really good engagement. So we're providing educational sporting equipment, and that relationship is with the Ngundarra people we value greatly, and we're very thankful for the Ngundarra people and the council for that relationship, which we continue to nurture and value. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas. Great presentation. A couple of really good questions here. First, you did mention Tribeca's Natural Resources Fund being on the register with a 15% or so interest. What was the I suppose the attraction, but what was the reasoning, or when did they join the register, and what do they bring, and what are they focused on?
Yeah, so Tribeca have been with the former company for some time from a previous life, but certainly the company, we've just changed the name recently from GCX to Terra Metals, And the company was really looking for a core asset that had the potential to deliver, great copper exposure of a large scale, and to be able to, go through the process of value creation from discovery to resource development in the copper space. So, this is the asset, the Dante asset, that was chosen to come in to that company. And that's where the focus is now. Obviously, Tribeca have participated in the recent capital raise. They continue to be supportive of the stock and of the project, of Dante project. And as I said, we have two of the Tribeca people on the board, including Ben Cleary, there, providing advice and support. Now, what do they bring? They bring a huge range of, advisory, networking, and also, capital exposure opportunities for the company, which is uncommon for a junior company of our size. So it provides a great advantage for us, and also some real power there upon, to really ramp things up and develop things upon discovery.
You also mentioned BHP just down the road, and sometimes that can be hard because they're doing a lot of great things, but they just don't tell the market. And you might see it, but can't tell much more than that. Are you constantly looking over the fence to see what they're up to? Because clearly you're hoping for some analogy between what they're doing and what you're hoping to find. And then I suppose in reverse, the question here is, how closely do you think they are watching what you're doing based on the land holding you have and their clear focus on copper?
Well, I know how closely they're watching us, and it is close. We're their neighbour and we're drilling. So they're watching us very closely. And we obviously, they're our neighbours, so we talk with them very often. And that's a relationship that we like to look after our neighbours, and we like to communicate with our neighbours regularly and see where we can share synergies and resources where possible, being out in this region. So do we look over the fence? Well, we don't need to, because they fly into our tenement. The airstrip's on our ground, so we see them every day as they land on our airstrip and drive down to Nebo Babel. We do go down to Nebo Babel from time to time to the mine site and every now and again. It's very, very close. So yes, out here we're all fairly close, I would say, and they're our nearest neighbour, and we're landlocked by them.
I always like when the questions come through that are well thought out, and clearly people who know what they're talking about. We've got a question here, which we'll just use as the last question. Will you wait for high penetrating AEM surveys before drilling the deeper diamond holes at Cronus?
We're still working out whether it's going to be necessary, because we have geochemical and mineralogical evidence that can be a very, very powerful targeting tool on its own. And it may be the case that airborne EM is not the tool that is suitable for identifying all mineralization styles. It can pick up massive sulfide mineralization, but Nebo Babel down the road is it's a 400 million ton disseminated sulfide body. So you can sometimes see them with airborne EM, not always, and you don't have to rely upon it, but it's an excellent tool, an extra layer of data to provide further confidence in certain targets, but not all. So if from the drilling we see the evidence geochemically and mineralogically, which is like we read the code and it tells us immediately, we know where we are and where we need to put the hole, then waiting for airborne EM is simply not necessary. Hence why we're doing reconnaissance geochemical drilling right now.
Great answer, great company, quality team, and clearly well backed. Exciting times ahead. We look forward to watching Terra Metals and its news flow with interest. Thomas, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, David.
Now I'd like to introduce Ian Warland, Managing Director at Cooper Metals. Cooper is a relatively new Australian-based mineral exploration company focused on the discovery of copper and gold across its portfolio of assets in Queensland and Western Australia. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So Cooper Metals is a young company. We're only 2.5 years old, and we're focused on copper and gold exploration. Our flagship project is in the Mount Isa region. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we have about 80 million shares on issue, a market cap of around $10 million. Importantly, we've got $4.4 million in the bank at the end of last quarter, and we're well supported by the Lowell Fund and the Lowell Resources Fund as well, which have around 13% collectively of our shares on issue. The board are well incentivized with around 7% of the shareholding. We have 3 projects, 2 in Queensland in the Mount Isa Inlier and 1 in WA, all focused on copper gold exploration. Next slide. So we've already heard quite a lot from John about the how copper is critical for clean energy and how the price has been going up at a rapid rate of knots in the last 12 months or so. So I just draw your attention to also that there's been quite a lot of M&A activity, not only BHP's recent attempt at Anglo, but also locally in the Mount Isa area, where we've had Harmony Gold buy out Copper Mountain for about $230 million for the Eva deposit. And more recently, we've just had Carnaby do a deal with Hammer Metals for about $20 million on the Mount Hope project. And we're seeing increased JV activity as well. You've got Evolution Mining, which have the Ernest Henry mine. They've recently done an $8 million JV deal with a junior explorer near Cloncurry. Next slide. So there's 4 main key things I want to talk about initially with the Mount Isa East Copper Gold project. You can see the map there that we have quite a large tenement holding. You've got Mount Isa just there on the left-hand side, and all our tenements are within about 50 to 100 kilometres of Mount Isa there. And we have 1,600 square kilometres of tenure. I've highlighted the Carnaby Resources tenements there in yellow, just down to the south there, where they've announced over 20 million tonnes of ore in several deposits that have recently been discovered. So that shows you that the area is very highly prospective for copper gold mineralisation. It's a very strong mining district. There's a lot of infrastructure there. You've got Mount Isa mines, of course. You've got Ernest Henry. You've got Eloise. You've got Mount Colin. So there's a lot of mining going on, and there's been mining there for over 100 years in the Mount Isa region. We believe that there's very strong exploration growth potential on our ground. We've identified in the last 2.5 years around 50 targets through a mixture of geophysical and geochemical prospecting. Next slide. Now, late last year, we did some drilling around our Brumby Ridge copper gold prospect, and we hit the spectacular 71 metres at 2.8% copper. Now, we followed that up earlier this year with some diamond and RC drilling. Now, the assay results are still pending for that, but we found that there was a well-mineralised parallel vein system there shown in pink. This is a plan here that you can see on the right-hand side. And there's these cross-cutting veins as well that are more in an east-westerly direction. So it's quite a complex vein system. The large intercepts that we got around 71 metres were in these cross-cutting veins, which are quite narrow. But what it does show is that it's a very fertile IOCG system in that area. So next slide. Next slide, you can see a section here through the Brumby Ridge copper gold prospect. And there's 2 main parallel veins shown in red, and there's that cross-cutting vein that you can see in white there. Now, there could be multiple of these cross-cutting veins. Their spatial extent is uncertain at this point, but I believe that it is evidence of a strong IOCG fertile system along the Brumby Ridge fault, and that Brumby Ridge fault does go for at least 25 kilometres. Next slide. Here's a geological map on the right. You can see the Brumby Ridge fault that I'm talking about running up through the centre of that map in a north-northwesterly direction. And there's quite a few copper gold prospects along that fault. And we're continuing to do prospecting along that fault, initially with our portable XRF, which is quite a rapid way to check for copper mineralisation and generate anomalies. And if those copper anomalies look good, then we move on to EM or IP on the ground to get those drill ready. So that work is ongoing at the moment. I've got a team in the field at the moment continuing that geochemistry through the area. And recently we've just drilled 4 prospects. We've done about 2,000 metres of RC. The assays are pending for that, and we should get those results later in the month. Next slide. Now, just talking about one of those prospects that we recently drilled, Mafic Sweat South, you can see that there's a geochemistry anomaly shown there in the plan. Now, that copper anomaly is about 500 metres long, 100 metres wide, and it's got a coincident VTEM anomaly. So VTEM is airborne EM. There's a shallow EM anomaly there. We did some initial drilling in 2023, and we got up to 65 meters at 0.34% copper in the oxide zone, and that hole finished in mineralization. So now we've done 3 more RC holes through that area, and we're testing deeper down, looking for a sulfide system and also trying to extend that mineralization footprint. So assays will be out for that later this month. Next slide. Similarly, Matrix West North, which is only about 700 meters along strike, has a coincident geochem and VTEM anomaly as well. Now, the geochem anomaly here is a lot longer. It's about 800 meters long. And we've just recently tested that with 4 RC holes for about 400 meters under some old workings, also into the VTEM anomaly and into the best part of the geochem anomaly. Next slide. Now, the Raven prospect is an interesting prospect. All these prospects are within 10 kilometers of each other, so it's like a cluster of copper gold prospects. I've got a geochemical plan that you can see here on the right of the copper anomalism. That's all portable XRF anomalism. We did some drilling into the Raven prospect late last year, and we got some economic intercepts which were really encouraging, around 10 meters at 1.3% copper and about 0.17 grams per ton gold. Now, Raven was discovered from a VTEM anomaly, so it was an airborne EM anomaly. There was no old workings here or anything. Raven has a little bit of pyrrhotite in it, which gives quite a good EM response. We did a downhole EM survey late last year, and that indicated that there was an off-hole conductor heading towards the southeast. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see here there's a long section. So the area that we drilled is shown in the red polygon there. We drilled that late last year in 2023. We hit the economic intercepts. The downhole EM showed an off-hole conductor, which is shown there in a pink polygon. And that's what we've just drilled in the last month. We've done 4 RC holes there for 600 meters, and those assays will be due out later this month. Next slide. Our Barbara East tenement, that's in the northern part of our tenement package, and it's near the Barbara deposit. Now, the Barbara deposit had around 5 million tonnes of copper gold ore in it at about 1.6% copper and some gold as well. Now, the Barbara deposit has an EM response, so it has a VTEM anomaly associated with it. So we got some government funding for a VTEM survey there in 2023, and significantly that generated 10 anomalies that look really good. 3 of those anomalies are particularly good and have been modelled up by our geophysicist. Those 3 anomalies show that the anomalies start below surface, about 25 to 50 metres below surface. And we've been on the ground there. We've found some weak copper gold anomalies associated with those anomalies, and we'll be drilling those later this year as well. So that's a really exciting prospect. There's never been any VTEM done over this area before our survey. Next slide. So over the 2.5 years, we've generated around 50 targets. We're systematically working our way through our tenure. We're using a mixture of geophysics and geochemistry. Just last year, we did over 7,000 soil samples. We've done over 2,000 line kilometres of VTEM. So we've had a very active 2.5 years, and that's paying dividends now, generating a pipeline of targets for us to systematically test. And we have a big year in 2024 testing these targets. Next slide. Just shifting to our Orindi project now, it's closer to Cloncurry. So it's near the Eloise mine, which has about 20 million tonnes of mined and remaining resources in it of copper gold. It's a very fertile area. We're looking for iron oxide copper gold and iron sulfide copper gold deposits. Next slide. Now, this shows a magnetic map on the left and a geology map on the right of the same area. You can see our tenements there shown in white, and we're really focusing on that prospective zone that you've got as a red outline. Now, that red outline shows a number of occurrences along there, the Jericho deposit, Eloise, etc. And Jericho itself was discovered by EM. So the next step here is an EM survey that we'll be doing later this year. And if we get a good EM anomaly, we'll be drill testing that one as well. Next slide. Just quickly on our Guru project in WA, it's not far from Silver Lake's Deflector mine. We've got 2 tenements there. In the last couple of years, we've been doing several phases of geochem surveys, and we've generated 5 gold anomalies. Next slide. Now, those 5 anomalies with the best result is a rock chip up to 2.56 grams per tonne gold. And all these anomalies are on a greenstone belt, which has had hardly any drilling in it. Quite a bit of these greenstone belt is undercover, so it hasn't had a lot of attention in the past. Now, we're just going through the regulatory processes at the moment. I've got a team right there at the moment doing some follow-up geochem and meeting the regulators on site, so we hope to be drilling there later this year as well. Next slide. We take our environmental and social and governance obligations very, very seriously. We have a good relationship with the local community, our stakeholders, including the Indigenous and the landholders in the region. Next slide. So just the key takeaways there. The copper price is up. Well, it's greater than this slide's about a week old, so I think it's great. It's more than 20% up in the last 12 months. So it's a great time to be in copper, of course. I see significant share price growth potential at Cooper Metals, with over 50 targets for us to test just in Mount Isa area alone. We've got a busy exploration program for 2024. We've already done 4,000 metres of drilling this year up there. We'll be doing a lot of follow-up drilling through the year and commencing exploration in our Arindi project near Cloncurry. We're well funded with over $4.4 million in the bank at the end of last quarter. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Great presentation. And as you say, copper price doing all the right things, and the project clearly rapidly advancing in the 2 years since you came to the ASX. A couple of very, very insightful questions from people who obviously know the business well. ESG and land access is becoming more important within the mining industry to maintain your license to operate, as you touched on a few slides ago. Could you provide some detail on what Cooper Metals is doing to manage access risk?
Sure. Look, I agree that ESG is becoming increasingly important, especially as our stakeholders become more informed, and there's a lot more competing land uses in the area, like wind farms, etc., and cattle farms, of course. There's a global trend here. We've heard from John about the recent mine that was shut down in Panama on environmental grounds. So, that's quite concerning. So we take that seriously. And I've seen juniors before lose their ability to do drilling as they breach their conditions or environmental conditions. So I've had a lot of experience personally discovering and developing deposits in highly regulated areas, regional reserves in South Australia. Queensland has a very well-mapped pathway for explorers and miners. So as long as you stick to that pathway and follow the process, I think you can, there's no problem there. Also, we think communication is very important. We do have robust agreements with all our landowners and the Indigenous groups as well. So we work to those agreements, and we've been finding that actually Queensland is a great place to explore, because the environmental regulations and also the Indigenous approval process works quite well with the explorers, because it is an area that has a rich mining heritage. And I think that the stakeholders are all quite used to working with miners and explorers in the area.
What about funding? Obviously, junior greenfields explorers, there is a challenge to make sure you've got the funds, which is seeing across the board a reduction in ground activity in the sector. How's Cooper placed for funding, and what do you need to do to meet the funding challenge?
Yeah, we're currently placed very well, and I think we saw from John's presentation that a lot of the micro caps were quite unloved in 2023. I will point out again that we did have a $4.4 million in the bank at the end of the last quarter, so we're well funded. Queensland again is a great place to explore because they're very serious about their critical minerals. So we've recently got what they call a tenement rent holiday, which puts another $100,000 per annum that we would be paying on tenement rent that is going into the ground instead. And at the end of this year, we will have received around $300,000 from the government in grants for geophysical surveys like V10 and a gravity